Most people learn about the basics of frog reproduction in elementary school. Frogs lay eggs in water, and the eggs hatch into tadpoles that grow into frogs. Only about half of all frogs follow these exact steps, but there are a few rules of thumb about frog reproduction. All frogs reproduce sexually, and all hatch from eggs. In almost all frogs, egg fertilization happens outside the female's body instead of inside. The female releases her eggs and the male releases his sperm at the same time. In order to make sure that the sperm reach the eggs, the male and female get into a mating posture called amplexus. The male climbs onto the female's back and clasps his forelegs around her middle. Frogs can stay in amplexus for hours or even days as the female releases as few as one or as many as several hundred eggs. Sometimes, it's easy to tell male frogs from female frogs. Many species are sexually dimorphic, meaning that there are differences between the bodies and colors of males and females. But in some species, males and females are hard to tell apart. In such species, male frogs often produce a release call when clasped by another male. During mating season, researchers can use release calls to tell which frogs are male and which are female. All frogs' eggs require moisture to develop, and most frogs abandon their eggs once they're fertilized. But not all eggs incubate underwater or without parental care. A few species carry their eggs in their vocal sacs or their abdomens. Others lay eggs in dry areas and keep the eggs moist with water or urine. Depending on the frog's species and the climate in which it typically lives, the eggs can hatch in a few days to a few weeks. In a few species, fully formed froglets hatch from the eggs, but most of the time the frog starts its life as a tadpole. While adult frogs are carnivores, tadpoles can be vegetarians or omnivores. Some are filter feeders that eat algae, and others have teeth and can eat anything from rotting vegetation to other tadpoles. Either way, tadpoles tend to be voracious eaters. It takes a lot of energy to complete their metamorphosis into frogs. Red-eyed tree frogs mate on a leaf in the rainforest. Tadpoles that live in temporary rainwater ponds often become frogs in a couple of weeks. The process can take months in species that live in permanent lakes, rivers, and ponds. But most of the time, the transformation follows the same basic steps. First, the back legs begin to grow. Then, as the front legs are forming, the tadpole's internal organs begin to change. It develops a pair of lungs so it will be able to breathe air, and its digestive system changes to accommodate its adult diet. The tail gradually disappears as it's absorbed into the body. When the froglet is ready to live on land, it usually has a little bit of tail left, but that gradually disappears. Certainly, frogs are fascinating creatures, and their reproductive process is no exception. Let's dive into how these amphibians reproduce. First, it's important to note that there are many different species of frogs, and their reproductive processes can vary slightly. However, there are some general patterns that most frogs follow. Frogs reproduce sexually, meaning that they require both a male and a female to reproduce. During mating season, male frogs will call out to females using a variety of vocalizations. These calls can be quite loud and can be heard from a distance. Once a female frog has been attracted to a male's call, the two will engage in amplexus. This is a mating position where the male frog grasps the female from behind with his front legs. The female will then release her eggs, which are fertilized by the male's sperm as they are released. The fertilized eggs are then laid in a variety of locations, depending on the species of frog. Some frogs lay their eggs in water, while others lay them on land. Some frogs even lay their eggs on leaves that overhang water, so that when the eggs hatch, the tadpoles can drop into the water below. Once the eggs hatch, the tadpoles will begin to feed on algae and other small organisms in the water. As they grow, they will develop legs and lungs, eventually transforming into adult frogs. Overall, the reproductive process of frogs is a fascinating and complex one. From the calls of the males to the laying of the eggs, there are many different stages to this process. By understanding how frogs reproduce, we can better appreciate these amazing creatures and the role they play in our ecosystem. Researchers in India have discovered a completely new frog mating position. This new style of amplexus, as frog mating is known, is not for the prudish. Without going into too much detail, basically the male frog releases his sperm onto the female's back where it runs backwards and fertilizes the eggs as they leave the ovipositor. Nor is this the first time a new position has been discovered in frogs. On closer inspection, the sex lives of frogs seem downright raunchy. Specific positions may serve to ensure that species of frogs only mate with their own kind. Such a prolonged process makes life difficult for frogs, especially females, who must go about their day literally carrying around a male frog. To find out how difficult this is, researchers tied amplexine cane toads together. Then they encouraged the females to move by gentle stimulation of the hind legs with a rod. Unsurprisingly, females had a more difficult time walking, swimming, and feeding. Talk about sexual selection. It is not always the male doing the grasping. In the coqui, a small tree frog native to Puerto Rico, the male climbs the female's back but does not grasp her. Instead he stays on her back, and after a period of prolonged inactivity, the female reaches her legs back to lock on top of the male's legs. The position apparently aids in internal fertilization. Most frogs fertilize externally. Spring is the perfect time of year to start spotting some of our native amphibians. Breeding season is upon them, and they're clustering around ponds in hope of finding a mate. In the winter months, our frogs, toads, and newts were hibernating in compost heaps, piles of dead wood or at the bottom of ponds. But as temperatures warm, they wake up and re-emerge. Around this time of year, you'll be able to see some of your local amphibians as they congregate around ponds to mate. This process kicks off a new rotation of their life cycle. Most animals, humans and apes being exceptions, typically have only one mating position, but frogs now have 7 known types of amplexus. In the most common method, the male grasps the female around the torso with his forelimbs and fertilizes the eggs as they emerge. The male often grabs the female well in advance of actual egg laying. Depending on species, mating pairs can remain clasped together for hours, days, even months. Frog eggs and tadpoles are food for fish, birds, and other animals, so most eggs don't survive to adulthood. Adult frogs have several enemies as well, including those that are microscopic. Next, we'll look at some of the threats to frog survival and how the absence of frogs could affect human life.